So Professor Gigerenzer, thank you for coming to Czech Republic. Thank you for joining us at the Prague Conference on Behavioral Sciences. Our conference is about behavioral science. You have a lot to do with the behavioral science. And I would like to ask you, what do you think about mainstream behavioral science or mainstream economics, so to speak?
No, the mainstream behavioral economics is not the same as behavioral sciences. It's not even the same as introducing psychology into economics. It is also only one of many possible versions of behavioral economics. Another one is what Herbert Simon had in mind. Herbert Simon was trying to formulate an alternative to the Homo economicus view. So how do people make decisions under uncertainty? So through uncertainty, we don't know the consequences of the actions, and you may not even know what all the actions are, not to speak of the probabilities. And so this was a much more radical version, and this has not become what is today mainstream economics. Mainstream economics can be defined by taking Homo economicus as even more serious than neoclassical economists do, and say that's the way we have to behave. And if the discrepancy between the behavior of that's attributed to Homo economicus and real people, the blame is on the real people, not on the theory. That was never Herbert Simon's idea, and is also not my idea. The entire psychology, you could say, in this view of mainstream economics is dispensable. If we would be rational, then we wouldn't need that. And if everyone would be rational, the future of behavioral economics would be zero.
Yeah, obviously we are still using the terms rational. Some people are also using the term irrational, which I think is even more complicated maybe. Herbert Simon was talking about something like bounded rationality, and then I think there was a debate on what is the rationality and different approaches to rationality. So first approach to rationality after Simon was Kahneman and Tversky, heuristics and biases, basically what they would think and what is the mainstream behavior economics today, that basically people are getting bombarded by all these biases and they are acting a little bit stupid maybe sometimes. And but there are also other views on rationality and some opposing views like yours or Vernon Smith, our keynote last year. And I read that some people are considering you and Vernon Smith like allies against the mainstream behavior economics. But maybe that's not completely true, right? Maybe also you and Vernon Smith has different opinion on rationality. So who is rational? Who is behaving rationally?
So first, I appreciate very much what Vernon Smith is doing. For instance, he considers evolutionary theory as relevant, so how the brain evolved, and not just logic. There are two meanings of rationality that I would distinguish. One is the meaning that's defined by the axioms of rational choice, which are content blind and without any context. And the other one is to define rationality as means to achieving goals. And the study of ecological rationality, a term that Vernon uses, a term that I use in a very similar meaning, is the study of how can we find out that a certain heuristic, that's now my term, Vernon would talk about markets, that a certain heuristic so in what environment can a certain heuristic exploit its structure in order to allow the human mind making decisions faster, more accurate, and with less efforts, because there's usually more other things to do. So that's the difference. If you just think logically, you may not get to a functional decision making that works. It's always said with concepts like money pump, but we have studied the entire literature, found no evidence for money pump. And in general, violations of consistency do not appear to be correlated, not even to speak of cause, for achieving things in the real world like wealth, health, or happiness. So this is why I think in order to understand what humans do, we need to look at ecological rationality and even consider that with just one good reason, you might be much better by ignoring everything else in the real world of uncertainty.
Okay, I'm happy that you opened like two topics that I would like to discuss next. One, you started to talk about making decisions fast versus making decisions logic, and there is a very popular concept in the mainstream behavior economics, which is the dual process theories, system 1 and 2. And I know that many people actually, many scholars, has some problems with this concept. Also you and me, but I think that your opinion on this would be appreciated. Like, so why don't you agree with this kind of system 1, system 2?
So I'm a psychologist by training, and I believe that this system 1, system 2 distinction is one of the very few cases in science where one goes backwards. So usually you start with loose dichotomies and distinctions and go towards precise models. And that's the only case where you give up, go the other way. You give up the precise models and end up with loose distinctions. So we know we have many models in psychology about how the mind works, how association works, how deliberate thinking works. That's all thrown away into a mere distinction. And the distinction is an assortment of dichotomies. The only content of this system 1 and system 2 is that very global concept like heuristic versus reason, conscious versus unconscious, or associations versus something else, are opposed. And the only way you could test this, whether it does anything, is to see whether these dichotomies, the poles, are really aligned. And they aren't even aligned. So heuristic is not aligned with unconscious. Every heuristic we have studied can be used consciously and unconsciously. The unconscious is not aligned with error. Errors are made deliberately all the time, and so on. And heuristics are not aligned with errors. So I do not really understand why people find anything in this distinction. The distinction, if you want an explanation, the distinction can be used to explain everything after the fact. It cannot predict anything precise. And why not 3 systems? Freud had 3, the id and the superego and the ego, and had at least some clear theory. Or why not just one distinction? In the good old times, there was just one system, it was God. Yeah. God explained everything what you did after the fact, and he could not predict anything like that. So what we need are precise models that are interesting, that can make bold predictions and not lose distinctions.
Okay, and moreover there might be different problem with system 1, system 2, and we already a little bit started to talk about evolutionary biology, about evolution, and the problem could be that there is basically no reason to think that we should evolve some 2 separate systems that somehow works differently in so many aspects, right? With the evolutionary approach to decision making, then it says basically that we were evolved in savannas, and that we are how to say that what we do is a decision making for Savannah, not for 21st century with all these like banking systems and employments and all these problems that we face every day. So do you think that there might be actually some errors that we bring from that age, that we still do something that we were used to do for hundreds of thousands of years in our evolutionary past, and we were not able to get rid of them?
Yeah. So I think there's good evidence that some of the mechanisms that we had involved in other environments carry over. Good examples are that we crave for sugar, like the Coke that you have. We crave for salt, or mechanisms like what I call dread risk, that people fear situations where many people die at the same time, as opposed to where as many or more die distributed over the year. So 9/11 is a good example for that, and we don't care about car accidents. So they are consistent with that. But still, we have brains that are flexible and not just linked into the history of evolution. We can do some part to find ways out of that. And they study how mechanisms now we get more interested, these are mechanisms, how can you formalize them? How they really translate into present day behavior is an important. In general, the human mind, I would say, evolved to deal with uncertainty, not with risk. So risk is a rare situation. If you go play the roulette in the casino this evening, you are in a situation of risk where everything that can happen is known. All numbers 1 to 36 plus green, all your actions and outcomes and probabilities, everything is known. So including the probabilities. That's a rare situation. The human mind, including rules of thumb, emotions, trust, imitation, evolved to deal with uncertainty. And in the classical definition of rationality as a logical thing, and dealing with risk, if you do risky choice between gambles, there is no uncertainty involved, and everything psychologically appears like an error, a bias, a cognitive illusion, but only in these type of situations. If you deal with real people, then you have to think about whom to trust, to make inferences, and not just having preferences. So most of the things we have to do inferences first before we at all can have a preference.
So according to this view, people are maybe not that biased or not that stupid, and basically they are acting very rationally in a way that they are doing what they can to survive and to survive as best as they can. Is that right?
Certainly they so if you take cognitive psychology, not the heuristics and biases program, in cognitive psychology, perceptual psychology, the human mind is considered a marvel, a miracle. How it can do this thing, so infer the world, say, from a two-dimensional picture on the retina, infer the third dimension. And in the mainstream behavioral economics, visual illusions, which are a byproduct, are considered as a thing of irrationality. No perceptual researchers would ever have this idea. So if you under uncertainty, you always have to make some kind of errors, because you do the impossible. You infer the world outside, for instance. And the social world adds another component. Take a well-known framing problem. So you have a heart condition and you consider a surgery that might be dangerous, and you ask the doctor, what's the prospect? Now the doctor can tell you either you have a 10% chance of dying or a 90% chance of surviving, according to mainstream behavioral economics, if you pay attention to the way the doctor frames the message, you commit an error called the framing error, because you stupid don't understand that 90% is the same as 100 minus 10%. This is total logical thinking. It could be called, and social intelligence means that you can read between the lines. So there is a reason why the doctor tells you a 10% chance to die. It's a warning, most likely, or a 90% chance to survive. It's a recommendation, most likely. And a number of studies in psychology on framing have shown this experimental to be the case. So the amazing ability of people to read between the lines, to infer what the other is telling us. And if you're a doctor in the US, you better not tell the patient directly what he should do, because you might be sued. So what we have here in this example, framing effects are not an error. They are a sign of an almost miracle kind of ability of people that is very hard to program into an artificial intelligence. We are not as far. So this human intuition is the real challenge to artificial intelligence. You can program logic, that's easy. And here we have a confusion in behavioral economics. So in this mainstream part of behavioral economics that's based on the heuristic and bias program, that many of the biases aren't biases at all. They are misunderstanding. A misunderstanding of human intelligence.
So would you agree that these so-called biases, many of them, are actually just a product of a bad science, and that the research on these biases is done in a way that basically the research or the research design want to trick people into stupid answers, and then they can be able to tell, we have discovered new bias and now we will get published and so on.
That's a way to see it. I would say there is a bias in mainstream behavioral economics. It's a more naive view about what's rational. And I'm amazed often how little thinking is about what's correct thinking. And also, you need to see that everyone who claims another one has a bias already knows what's right and you got it wrong. Under uncertainty, that's very hard to say. We should be a little bit more modest and give people the benefit of doubt and take seriously what they're doing. That doesn't mean that they're always doing the right thing, but it also means that we as researchers cannot always notice ahead what's being done. And the interesting thing is that under uncertainty, what is good decision making is quite different from under risk. And we have seen often that very simple heuristic that commit all the sins against rationality according to the standard definition outperform, predict better if you test them than so-called complex or rational models. And that gives you an understanding. If anything evolved in our brains, it is something that is highly accurate under uncertainty. It can never be perfect, but also fast. Because in many dangerous situations, you need to act fast rather than to consider all possibilities.
Okay. So tonight you will receive the Allais Memorial Prize in Behavioral Sciences, and especially for your contribution, for your critics of the mainstream behavioral economics. And I would like to know, what do you think we would need more in behavior economics or behavior sciences? Do we need more maybe evolutionary approach, or maybe do we need more self-criticism of behavior economists or self-reflection of behavior economists, that maybe we should stop the view that the behavior economics as it's now is a holy Bible, and we cannot say nothing against it, and everything who says something against is basically wrong, and we all have this kind of confirmation bias.
So I've been working since many years on an alternative, not just a critique. And so the alternative is to start where Herbert Simon started. Herbert Simon is not the predecessor of Thaler or Kahneman. He had a very different program. And that's only by hindsight that this lineage has been there. So the first thing is take uncertainty serious. Uncertainty is not that you don't just not know the probabilities. It is that the future is uncertain. At the moment we're sitting here, we don't know where Brexit is going. With hindsight, we can explain it everything. That's part of uncertainty. Nevertheless, one has to make some decisions. So take uncertainty seriously. That means that one needs to analyze heuristics from a point of view how well they predict under uncertainty, and not measured from an armchair argument that ignores an information and therefore. The second thing is take psychology seriously. At the moment, in mainstream economic psychology has the role of psychopathology. And that's more or less the only role. So the psychology for psychologists explains how people deal with uncertainty. And with the standard tools, you're not getting there. And this is why much of experimental research in behavioral economics just studies choice between gambles, the world of risk. Go into the real world. And third, study how in the real world experienced people make decisions, like managers. And managers often use very simple heuristics and take them seriously, but study them carefully how well they work. Rather than saying, oh, they have cognitive illusions and limited cognitive abilities, and we know everything better. And then study the ecological rationality of these heuristics. So in what situations do they work? And that's not just an argument, this is a mathematical discipline, and we have proved many situations where you, with a single reason, you will predict as well or better and much faster and transparenter than an entire regression, for instance. That shouldn't happen according to mainstream economics. So we need to have the courage, take psychology seriously, take uncertainty seriously, take heuristics seriously, and study them carefully.
So do you need more self-reflection in behavior economics, or rethink behavior economics in order to push the field forward and maybe to get rid of some theories that might not be correct?
Yeah, so I personally think that the current program of behavioral economics equals heuristics and biases has helped to get certain issues in the forefront, like heuristics. Has also helped to make economists a little bit more aware again from psychology. But it has put psychology into the negative basket. And just if everyone would be rational, there would be no future for this behavioral economics, because psychology has nothing positive to contribute. This is the big error of this program. Psychology has lots positive to contribute. It helps us to understand how we achieve these miracles that the human species has understood. And here we need also an evolutionary perspective. We need a social perspective, and very important, we need to open up our perspective outside of the mind. All these biases are about internal alleged errors. While every neoclassical economist knows that it has much to do with the reinforcement structure, with the environment. with the system in which someone is. And that's forgotten, and that's the danger of the next step of so-called nudging, where the understanding that something goes wrong is in the person or not in the system. So instead of, for instance, the attempt to put apples on the eye level at the counters of children so they take apples, the House of Lords in the UK has criticized the then Cameron government, who supported the behavioral insights teams, the so-called nudge teams, for not taking measures against industry in terms of advertising unhealthy food, but rather saying, yeah, we do nudging, you see? And here we need also get a broader perspective. We need, I think about whether that's a good idea. I don't think that you get very far with nudging, and the effects are small mostly, and you don't know whether they're thing. The German chancellor has hired now 3 of my former researchers to have a program that's effective, not by nudge people like sheep into where they want to, but by making people competent, including doctors, and talking with them and having highly effective measures that are more effective than nudging things, for instance, for hand washing, the key problem of hygiene in hospitals. So we can develop very different public policies if we start to take people serious.
Last year, I asked Vernon Smith how was it to bring psychological methodology into economics in 1950s, 1960s, as he did. And he said that he was, of course, a complete outlaw. And also Herbert Simon, who was a psychologist, was saying basically that and no one liked him because economists didn't like him, psychologists didn't like him. And you are also bringing something new to the behavior economics. So how was it to be maybe in 1990s, where when the program of heuristics and biases was very popular, to go against the mainstream and to say like, look, maybe you should rethink something, maybe there is something wrong. So I see some parallels between Herbert Simon, Vernon Smith and you in this way of doing something in the opposite way than everybody done so far.
For me, it's an intellectual challenge, and I'm curious by nature, and I'm not really willing to surrender my intellect to a reigning paradigm. There are others besides those who I mentioned who were less successful than Herbert Simon and Vernon Smith. For instance, there's a brilliant psychologist, Lola Lopez, who has been in conflict with the then reigning Kahneman-Tversky paradigm, and according to her, she was just pushed out of the field. These are the things which I do not like so much. I had also had permanent ad hominem attack till if you read the biography by Michael Lewis of Kahneman and Tversky, I'm in the last chapter as something like the evil intellectual, like Dr. Moriarty in Sherlock Holmes, and the things that I don't bother about that, but the things that I was surprised that, for instance, Michael Lewis never contacted me. He just retells the story that he hears from the heuristic and biases people. So you have to go through some of these things, but that's not only characteristic to science, it happens everywhere. And I think at the end, science is about believing in coming near the truth. And in that case, it's even more because it at the end is also a picture of the people. And I don't think that people are like, as Thaler and Sunstein jokingly say, Homer Simpsons. And we will not understand people if we think so negatively about them.
Is there something you would recommend, basically, not only to researchers but to anyone who would like to go like against the mainstream, or what quality they do need to have to succeed, or what they need to do to survive all these kind of attacks from the majority?
I mean, basically, it's nothing new. Huh? Kepler had to go against the mainstream. Einstein had to go to the mainstream. Everyone has to. Every innovation. What you need is you need to try to be very careful to read lots, to understand the other side better than they understand themselves. And also you need a portion of courage and also curiosity. And I always thought I was a musician in an earlier career, and I gave up a very profitable career for a much more risky thing because I didn't know whether I'd ever become a professor. So I always thought that if you don't take risks, you will regret it at some point. Just think it's the last day of your life and you know it's gone, and then you play it back. And for me the worst thing would be to realize I haven't dared. If I had failed, that's okay, but not even there. That would be very difficult for me.
One last, maybe a little bit personal question. You already mentioned that. You know that we have found a video on YouTube where you are playing a banjo in a car. Can you tell us something about this?
Okay, that was an earlier life of myself. When I was a student, I financed my study by playing in bands, and this was in the mid-70s, where VW produced the successor of the Beetle. That was the Rabbit, or called Golf, and the top secret. And they advertised and made a competition of bands in Germany, and we won it. And the rest can be seen on the. It's actually the American ad. It was the first VW Golf or Rabbit ad that existed, and the car was very successful.
Was the commercial successful?
Obviously, yeah. That was a time I enjoyed very much, and I had not believed that it still exists, that commercial, but I won a communicator prize in Germany for communicating science to the public. Which is something I find very important, and they dig that commercial out and put it out there, and now it's out there and can see.
All right. So thank you very much for the interview, and I hope you will enjoy Prague for the rest of the weekend.
I already do.
Good. Thank you.